toolkit author and speaker today. We are thrilled that Jamie agreed to author this Better Than Cash Alliance Toolkit for Development Partners because of her incredible depth of experience in this field. Many of you know Jamie already. She's been a leading voice on electronic delivery of social cash transfers to poor people since 2008. She wrote one of the first papers on linking social payments with financial inclusion opportunities and has written over 30 papers, articles, and op-eds on this topic alone. She has run the Global Savings and Social Protection Initiative at the New America DC-based think tank, which had the largest global data platform ever evaluating opportunities for financial inclusion through cash transfers. And Jamie comes to us today as a senior associate for Bankable Frontier Associates, which is a global strategy consulting firm specializing in financial services. And she has been leading the research projects on electronic payments in developing countries. Jamie, we're thrilled to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was such a kind introduction. It is so great to be here. And certainly this toolkit has been a labor of love, but not just for me. I have been really fortunate to work with an amazing team at Bankable Frontier Associates on this toolkit and have benefited from the contributions of many other people, including the Better Than Cash Alliance Knowledge Management Working Group, Net Hope, and many others who have given a lot of their time and input into the toolkit. So it's not just my product here.
Great. Yes, that's one of the great things about being part of an alliance is that we are able to both draw from and help all of the different members of the alliance. So yes, we're really glad, and thank you to all the people who've contributed to this toolkit. So for those of you who don't know, the Better Than Cash Alliance is a global alliance of governments, private sector, and the development community who are all committed to shifting away from cash to any form of electronic or digital payments and transfers. We do three things. We advocate for payers and others to move from cash to electronic, whether it's government, private sector payroll and supplier payments, or humanitarian and emergency aid. We also have a knowledge and research agenda that develops good practices, case studies, and toolkits that are able to support our members in moving from cash to electronic, and we provide technical support as appropriate. And you would have guessed that the toolkits come under our knowledge agenda. And we are launching these new toolkits to help all of our members as well as a public good in the shift from cash to electronic payments. And these toolkits were developed in response to demand from our members saying, where do we start? Or we've started and we've had problems. I wish we'd known what questions to ask as we were going into this process. So this first toolkit is for our friends in the development community, and tomorrow we'll look at governments, and on Wednesday companies who are thinking about moving from cash to some form of electronic payment. So our agenda today, you've seen the agenda flashing up, and now we're actually getting there, right? So the agenda today is we're going to give you an overview of the toolkit and how it's organized. Now you need to know that this is a 150-page toolkit. This is not something that you're going to just read quickly. And so we won't be able to go through all of it today, but just to give you the highlights. And we're going to focus on two parts: the decision-making process about when and whether to start shifting away from cash, and then the 6-step process that will guide you. So that will cover the bulk of our time today, and then we'll look at the frequently asked questions that come up about the shift for development partners, and a time for Q&A. And as Maura said, you can see on your screen at the right, there's a bar that says questions. This will just come to us here. It won't go to everybody. So you can ask whatever question you want, and then we'll collate them and have time to address them in the last 15 minutes approximately. And then at the end, what we're going to do is we will invite all of you to a Yammer site, which is a community of practice, where you'll be able to download the toolkit and interact with Jamie and others who are working it, because issuing it as a beta version. For those of you who know that language, it means that it's not the final, that it's as good as we've got with all of our members so far, and it's a good enough it's in good enough form to be able to really work with it. But there are areas where it probably needs tweaking, and so we'd love for you to be part of that tweaking process in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then it will be uploaded onto our website in April. So also, for those of you who get called away, we are recording this, and it's going to be on our website, so you'll be able to come back and listen to it if you can't join for the whole session today. So with that introduction and agenda, we'll get started, and we'll try one of these polls, see if we can get the polls working, right? So as you can see, the first question is about who is on this call. I'm sure you'd like to know. So the poll coming up asks you which type of development partner, which type of development partner best describes you or your institution. Many of you come from local or international NGOs or from the United Nations or other multilaterals, but we're also really thrilled if you're from a consultancy firm, because you're the ones who are helping the development partners. Some of you come from a funding or donor agency, or maybe others are academics or people just interested in this issue. So we'll give you about 10 more seconds to click on your screen and see which answer you have given. So 10, maybe we'll go 5 more seconds. Everybody seems to have registered. So 5, 4, 3, 2. Let's see if it works. Is it going to come up? Can we share? So can everybody see? Great. Can we put it on the screen? Not at the moment. Oh yes, you can see it. Great. So as we expected, terrific. We've got local or international NGOs and people who are working with them, the consultancy firms who are working with them, as the majority of people on the call today. So you know you're amongst friends. So really glad, and also, of course, a particular shout out to our United Nations or multilateral organizations, sister organizations. So great, we know the polls work, and it's good to see who else is on the session with us, the webinar with us today. Also, what is interesting for us, and particularly coming up with the questions later, and for Jamie as she goes through the toolkit, is at what stage of the digital journey are you at? Are you starting out, just thinking about it? What are the right questions to ask? Are you already underway and realizing that you may want, there's some issues that you haven't thought about already? Are you nearly there, or are all your payments digital? Or maybe you're not quite sure what stage you're at. So if you could click, and it looks like most people are clicking really well, great. And then you'll be able to see where everybody else is. We'll give you another 5 seconds. And then we'll see who's on the webinar today. Okay, we close the poll. And let's see what's... Oh, terrific. We've got a really nice mix, Jamie. We've got a third starting out, a third underway, and a third well underway. So that's really really terrific that we've got such a wide range of people here. So please don't hesitate to put your questions into the webinar, because not only will we address them today, but they'll be part of the Yammer site, and we'll be able to address them in improving the toolkit as we go. So let's get started. Jamie, what do we have on our screen? I should say, for those of you who are on a desktop, you'll be able to see this clearly. For those of you on a mobile phone reading it on your way to work, you probably can't see very clearly. And I want to explain to you that we're showing you what will be on the screen when this is web enabled. It will not be a massive great manual that you'll get. It is going to be web enabled, and you can see that there, for those of you on the screen, that when this is web enabled, there are the links that you can use as you go through. So Jamie, can you get us started by explaining what we see on our screen?
Yes, thanks, Ruth. Thanks so much for kicking us off. So great to see these poll responses and see who we've got on the line and where everyone is in their journey and the institutions they're coming from. Thanks to everyone who's joined us from all over the world for the webinar. So to your question, Ruth, so what we have here is an early introductory screen of the beta version of the toolkit, as you said, which will be refined and web-mounted over the coming weeks. What you'll see is in the top left corner are the words development partners, which indicates that we are in the toolkit geared toward the development community. And as you said, Ruth, there are 5 different toolkits being created, each geared toward either a particular sector from development partners, business, or government, or a particular issue like running a diagnostic or measuring the state and pace of the shift to digital. So if anyone just heard what I said and thought to themselves, uh-oh, I am in the wrong toolkit, you are in luck. There are webinars all week long for each of these. So you can continue to join us today or definitely join us the rest of the week. But moving along through what you see on the screen, you'll continue seeing across this top line a navigation with drop-down menus. It'll take you to the 4 core sections of this toolkit. And those are also what you see summarized in the 4 boxes on the screen. Section 1 is around context and awareness. This gives you the bigger picture around why your institution should consider shifting to digital. Section 2 on readiness and engagement helps you assess how ready your institution is to shift and then helps you prioritize where to start that process. Section 3, framing the case, takes you through a process to recommend how to shift a particular payment type. And now this is really the meat of the toolkit, is this framing the case section. And then section 4 contains lots of general resources that links you to frequently asked questions and other useful materials, from case studies from all over the world to other really super tools and toolkits developed by the other partners that we have and others working hard on these issues in the field, like NetHope, Mercy Corps, the Cash Learning Partnership, and many, many others. So we have a lot of that there. By the end of the toolkit, you will be able to set out the costs and benefits for replacing cash payments and your choice for a digital payment option that best suits your needs in the environment where you work. But it's really important to note, and we have this nice and bold, if you are able to see it in the bottom of this screen, that the toolkit helps you assess these options, but it is not an implementation manual. It will not help you implement the option you choose. That's a whole other process that you'll have to go through.
Thanks, Jamie, for making that clear. So it gets you to a point where you know what decision to make. It helps you ask all the right questions. And we noted that about a third of the people on the webinar today were starting out. And you mentioned in the context and awareness section, there are major trends on why many development partners are interested in shifting to digital payments. Could you just explain that a little?
Yeah, of course, sure. There are lots of reasons why development partners are getting excited about shifting from cash or in-kind to digital. So what you see now is a screen that briefly outlines some of the core reasons that we see driving this shift. These are issues, such issues of greater efficiency in the work that we're doing, cost saving, increased transparency or reduced leakage, enhanced speed and security of payments. They also have to do with issues of greater effectiveness of our operations and programs through opportunities for financial inclusion, economic empowerment, and even economic development. So what we're trying to do in this screen and throughout the toolkit is aiming to provide some of that initial evidence behind these benefits, what we're actually seeing out there, and then even linking you to some real-world examples of what we're seeing so that the users of the toolkit can see how this is all playing out with their peers in the real world right now.
Great, yes, and people will be able to link to the examples of these different reasons. And for those of you who were involved in our previous webinar about WFP in Kenya, there was a great example of how their Cash for Assets program bolstered financial inclusion amongst recipients as well. So if everyone has these great reasons for shifting, how does the toolkit help? How do you decide where to start?
Well, that's also a super question. So what we do in the very beginning is give you a decision tree. that really helps you decide what to do. So we're recognizing, like we all saw, that the development community is really diverse, lots of different types of institutions and actors with different needs, and all at different stages of shifting. So you're going to have varying needs, varying questions when it comes to your decision-making process for shifting. So our goal with the toolkit is to help guide all kinds of development partners and help them advance their plans to shift by taking them through this decision-making process. So this is here static, but on the web-mounted version will be an interactive decision tree that will help toolkit users get to the information that they need and get to it fast. So the questions here, you see here, connect you to those 4 main sections of the toolkit that I summarized a moment ago. So for instance, at the top left side of the screen, you see question 1, are you new to digital payments? If so, you will definitely want to spend some time working through that section 1, the context and awareness section that I described. If not, if you've been around this block for a while, you can move to section 2. Are you ready to start, ready to invest effort in shifting? And if you're not sure yet, then you'll really want to work through this readiness and engagement section to help prepare yourself, and so on and so on. So that's what this decision tree does for us.
I am looking at this screen, Jamie, and I can see estimated time to read all of it. And from when I was looking at it, that seems like it's quite optimistic. So maybe if people are, when they download this and read it for themselves, if we need to improve that timing, you'll help us know. And I notice on the right it says payment knowledge test. Is that, is there a test in the toolkit?
There certainly are lots of tools and worksheets in the toolkit. Yeah, so we would love to actually try one of these out. A fun and useful feature of this section allows you to test your knowledge of electronic payments, which will help you determine where to go next in the toolkit. So if you do well on this self-test, then you can really jump right into section 2, into readiness and engagement. If not, then it may make sense for you to spend a little bit more time in section 1, getting up to speed, a little more up to speed on background, context, and all those trends related to digital payments.
Okay, so let's try one out. Question 4 says, oh no, question 5, mobile wallets have been used for making cash transfers to poor people. So, okay, well we only have 2 options, true, false, or 3 options, true, false, or don't know. And we'll see what most people think. Have mobile wallets been used for cash transfers? Rightio. I think there's a pretty clear result here. Can we show the results? Okay. Over 80% thinks that it is true, and others 10 false and 7 don't know. But there's a clear majority of people think it's true. Jamie, is that the right answer?
Yes, the answer is true. But I want to explain a little bit more here. So the use of mobile phones to enable payments to the poor populations is increasingly common. But interestingly, actual mobile wallet-based payments, for instance, a mobile money account owned and managed by the cash transfer recipient, is still relatively rare. So that someone said false or that they weren't sure is not a surprise to me, and there is some gray area there. So the World Food Program has used them in Kenya for their operations. I know Mercy Corps has used them in the Philippines. There are a variety of good examples. But there is this kind of common misconception among the development community that everyone who is doing a mobile-based cash transfer is doing it via a mobile wallet. But so far, actually, what we've seen is that many of these are mobile vouchers, where you get on your mobile phone and notice that you can go pick up your cash payment, or some other mobile-enabled payment where the mobile, you're able to go to a merchant and put in a code, but it's not actually into your mobile money account. It's much less frequent to have a payment into a cash transfer recipient's mobile money account.
Fascinating, all the different details. And so that leads to the question we've got on the screen here. What is a digital payment and why does it matter?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So considering this, we really have heard that there's been some confusion about what is a mobile wallet, what is a mobile payment, what is a digital payment, what are we even talking about here? And so we anticipated this for many toolkit users, and so we included this explanation in the toolkit, which says what we mean by digital payments the variations on that theme, and why it matters. So for the toolkit, we define digital payments as transfers of value from one payment account to another using a digital device. And this is a definition that's totally consistent with the G20's Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, the World Bank's definition, and others. So we're not just making up our own willy-nilly definition, but we do want to highlight how there are some gray areas and there's some variations on that theme. But when you consider the issue of mobile wallets, you'll see here what we explained that payments into a personal mobile money account, and it doesn't really matter whether this is a mobile money account just with a telco or whether it's connected to an actual bank account, but into a personal mobile money account, that counts as a digital payment. But sending an SMS-based mobile voucher, for instance, does not count. And so that is not covered at all in this toolkit. So that's what this context and awareness section does. It really helps you to get your bearings on where are we starting from, what are we talking about. And by the end of the section, you should be aware of the opportunities and potential created by digital payments and able to see how this might apply to your situation. However, since payments really differ so much by type and their potential to be digitized, the next step is really about deciding how to prioritize, where to start, and how to focus your efforts. That's the readiness and engagement section I described earlier. So what we have here, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. This is what we've got right up here. So can you walk us through it?
Yeah, sure. So these are the 4 steps of the readiness and engagement section. This is what this section does. As I said, it aims to help guide your institution's starting point in the shift. So what we're looking at first is what you are trying to achieve with the shift. These are your drivers. The second, we look more at the volume and types of payment flows that your institution makes. This is the scope of what you're doing. Third, we assess the wider context of factors that will either support or hinder the shift for you. These are things like the payment infrastructure where you're trying to operate, some of your own internal institutional readiness issues. And then all these together will get you to step 4, prioritizing whether and where to start this process for shifting. How ready are you and where should you start?
So from what you've seen, Jamie, what are the biggest influencing factors in a development partner's readiness to shift to electronic payments then?
Well, Ruth, every situation is really different, so I wouldn't want to generalize too much, but I have noted that development partners are often really surprised by the limited options they have to meet their specific and often multiple objectives. Particularly if they want to do it really quickly or in a really, really cost-effective or inexpensive way. Usually there's some real investment that's needed either in internal systems or the external environment to really implement digital payment schemes and implement them well. So for instance, I've seen humanitarian organizations who wanted to use mobile payments to make emergency payments in remote areas thinking it would be the cheapest and most accessible way to pay, but then found that either the mobile network or the mobile money agent network were either too weak or had problems and they just had to change course. So this is even what happened the first time that the World Food Program tried to make their emergency payments for cash for assets via M-Pesa in the eastern part of Kenya. And even when they switched to their card-based payment via Equity Bank, it required some big investments on their part to create and train staff around the management information systems and all the other internal requirements that they needed to run the program.
Okay, so that really makes the case for why we have to go through a really clear decision-making process to understand what are the options, what are the risks, what are the costs to have the best chance of success. So you said that there were 6 steps, 5 here, for framing the case for a specific payment stream. So this is what we want to really focus on, isn't it, these steps?
Yes, absolutely. So a very large portion of this toolkit, as I said, this is the real meat, is helping guide development partners through the structured 6-step process to frame the case to shift a payment stream. So the specific payment stream we are focusing on today is on cash transfers because this is clearly just such an important part of why many development partners are shifting to payments for their programs and their operations. But as you maybe hopefully can see on the screen, there are also modules for salary payments and payments to suppliers, which are also really important. So that's there as well. But we're going to focus on cash transfers today in these 6 steps.
Okay, so so salary payments are critical. I know that one of our colleagues at UNCDF has been working on payments to Ebola response workers in Sierra Leone, and so those are very important parts for development partners. But today we're going to focus on cash transfers. But there are lots of different types of cash transfers depending on the type of development partner. So do you want to make sure we're all on the same page?
Yes, of course. So, this is, absolutely, as we keep saying, there's such a diversity of different types of partners and different things that we're doing, lots of types of cash transfer schemes as well. So whether you are making a short-term or one-off emergency payment or longer-term and ongoing developmental payments, this is really going to influence your decision-making process for your shift and the structure of how you're going to do it, the objectives of your plan. All of that will vary depending on what kind of scheme you're using. So we highlight the differences between those very briefly here, and we also offer 2 case studies. One that's looking at digital payments experience in post-Typhoon Haiyan, where they had to rapidly get money out in a major catastrophe area, and another that considers more a regular ongoing digital payment scheme in Kenya. This is, again, the Cash for Assets we've mentioned a couple of times. So these studies compare approaches of 2 different types of schemes. And really, the aim is to help users see how these 2 institutions approach their decision-making process for the objectives that they had, the context that they were working in, the time frame they had to work in. So those are 2 that are here, but there are several more that you can find in the general resources section of the toolkit, and more I'm sure will be added as they become available. This is going to be sort of a living, breathing online document. So, and if you look at the resources section, you see something that you think is missing, you have recommendations for new content, we are very open to hearing your recommendations.
Great, and I should note, of course, that Philippines and Kenya were 2 of the founding members of the Better Than Cash Alliance, so it's great that we're working with the development partners and the country members here. So those are very useful case studies, but we really need to get started, so let's go to step 1.
Okay, great, here we are. So the first and arguably the most important step throughout this whole process is to determine your drivers. How do you, or your institution, how do you prioritize your motivations for digitizing cash transfers? So the worksheet that you see in front of you here helps you get your bearings on the envisioned benefits you see to shifting from in-kind or cash to digital payments. For instance, what's more important to you? Is it minimizing delivery costs, or is it minimizing the time and cost the recipient bears to collect their cash transfer? Is it minimizing the time to implement or scale the program, or is it maximizing developmental benefits to the recipient? You really have to prioritize these. They can't all be number 1. They can't all be the most important thing because they're going to be trade-offs. So that's part of what this process is really getting down to what you're trying to do and really considering the trade-offs among the different options you have here in terms of your objectives and motivations.
But it's really hard, isn't it? I mean, we want everything now. So I'd be very interested to see what those of all of the people on the webinar think are their strongest motivations for shifting to electronic payments. So we'll do a poll here. What's your organization's strongest motivation? The number 1. Okay, you can't put all of them. There's not all of the above. So it'll be really interesting. Is it minimizing the costs? Is it reducing leakage or improving transparency? Is it increasing speed and minimizing the time? Or is it the financial inclusion benefit that is your real motivation? So, and if you put other, if you could put in the question section what another motivation is, then we'll be able to see that. So we'll do 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, everybody's voting here. 2, 1, let's close the poll and see what the answer is. Great, we got over just about 50% are focused on financial inclusion, and that will really change the way that people are designing their programs if they really want financial inclusion and not just a transfer of money. And then a quarter want to reduce leakage and improve transparency. Really important when because cash has a big problem for leakage and transparency. And then others, minimizing costs, increasing speed. So Jamie, is this what you expected?
You know what, Ruth? It is not.
Ah.
To be honest with you, interesting. It is. No, this is very, very interesting, and why I've been so excited to have this webinar. I honestly was expecting more people to have their number one motivation to be minimizing costs of delivering cash transfers. It is really surprising to see that way down at 10%, since that is it's usually those issues of efficiency tend to come up first, and issues of effectiveness kind of come at the next stage. So, you know, I love what I'm seeing here. Lots of enthusiasm for real empowerment and real opportunity for the recipient populations. But it is a bit of a surprise to me.
Well, it's good that that's why we had the poll, to see what everyone's priorities are, and because it illustrates how important it is to go through this first step, really identifying what your priorities are, because that will affect all the other. We know that many people, at least half of the people, are starting out or looking at an early stage of transition. So making sure that you understand this is your priority will affect all the other steps on moving away from cash. So let's go to the second step. Can you explain that for us, Jamie?
Yes, great. So, waiting for the screen to come up so everyone can see where we are. Wonderful. So step 2 in shifting your cash transfers is identifying your stakeholders. So the process of shifting has implications within an institution as well as for the recipients you're trying to reach, and lots of other external stakeholders. And these will all vary depending on the scale and scope and design of what you're trying to do. So stakeholders really need to be identified early on in your decision-making process, together with the roles that they need to play throughout that process, and how that's all going to influence those drivers that we just discussed and looked at, and ultimately the options that you're going to have. So, I mean, for example, we have seen that knowing your stakeholders, and particularly identifying who your champions are for this shift and who some of the resistors may be to shifting, can really be the difference between a clear path forward and several roadblocks on that way to digitizing payments. So this is a really important step too.
Yes, I'm sure it's as important as step 1, but, you know, understanding who all the different stakeholders, it takes a bit of a while to figure it all out as well. So once you've done that, you go to step 3.
Yes, so step 3 is investigating your payment options. So this looks like a simple sort of diagram here on the screen, but this is actually a really long process, not really long, but a pretty long process in the toolkit. What we do here is we take you through a thorough analysis of these 3 critical choice variables, A, B, and C, that you see across the bottom of the screen. These are the maximum distance recipients should travel to get their payments, which affects the number of types of pay points that you need. The second are the payment account features that you want, which affects time to roll out, security, cost, and time from issuing payments to recipients receiving their funds. And then the third, or C, that you see here is the role of the payment service provider, that partner that you're going to have throughout this process. This is going to affect who you can work with and the cost and risks that you're either likely to face or willing to bear when you choose the different partners you're going to work with. So this is a much longer step, and we take you through each of these really thoroughly. But after you go through that, then what you're going to end up with is in the next slide. There we go. So this is definitely going to be hard for a lot of people to see, but we wanted to just illustrate this for you and show you that by the end of step 3, what you should have been able to do is identify 1 or more feasible option sets. So what you see here are 3 option sets for a hypothetical institution that we made up for the toolkit called INGO in the country of Ecosystemia. Very clever names, I'm sure. So in the toolkit, we actually created a simulation of a hypothetical institution, what you see here. And we go through the entire process throughout that toolkit, all of these steps, to show you how this would actually look. In the real world, though this isn't a 100% real-world example. It's informed by what we've actually seen out there in the field. So this screen shows you what the feasible option set ended up being for INGO based on their 3 critical choice variables. So if you can maybe see that option 1 is an option where they have the closest possible pay points to their recipients. And we have some factors there: the timeline, the number of pay points, account type, what type of payment service providers could do this, and some other notes and issues that they'd have to think about. Option 2, where INGO would pay via more inclusive, financially inclusive accounts, but would do so with less pay points, which means longer distance to travel for the recipients. And then option 3, where the recipients would have a choice of how they receive their payment, but would still have a longer distance to travel. And so that kind of shows you some of the trade-offs that are being considered by INGO but we would work you through and show you that process if you look at this example on the screen. So what we expect is that any of the development partners using this toolkit, that by the end they're able to identify these option sets at this level of detail for themselves. And this is a critical starting point to be able to estimate how much these different options would actually cost. So that's the next step.
Before going on to the next step, Jamie, so if at least half of the people on the webinar, financial inclusion was their #1 priority, and so if they were going through this, or when they go through this example on the toolkit, this option 2, more inclusive account, I see that under the notes you've put, it would be offering more inclusive accounts such as withdrawals and other payments available. And under account type it says would allow deposits and other payments to be made. Mm-hmm. And so this is where you start bringing in your priorities, right? So you see what the options are and you can see which one achieves your goals better.
Yes, exactly. But you can, if you also read a little bit further into it, you see some of the trade-offs that this INGO has to face once they do an assessment of the actual payment infrastructure where they're trying to operate. That they would actually have to develop the payment infrastructure a bit more, and that would require some investment. So really, you have that option, but how long will it take to get the actual payment infrastructure to allow you to employ that option? And so these are the trade-offs and things that when you go through this process, we're going to be able to highlight for you and show you, all right, this is your goal, but here's what it's going to take to get there. Here are the other options. Maybe there's some pros and cons that you're going to need to weigh to really decide what you can do now and to still meet your goals in the way that you need to meet them. So so there's lots going on there. It's really a lot to cover, but just to highlight for you that we do have this illustrative example and that this is what we expect for you to be able to do by the end of by this stage of the toolkit, this step 3.
Okay, I'm looking at the gray line which says after investigate options, it says calculate costs. So once we have all these options, we have to calculate the costs then. So this is where, reality hits, right?
Yep, yes, of course. So this is a huge issue. And then, you're going to have what's feasible and then what's feasible within your budget. It's always it's not always the same thing. So step 4 in the toolkit is to take you through that process of understanding and calculating the cost to shift based on these option sets. Before we had 3, maybe you have 2, maybe there's more, but based on these option sets. So there are several worksheets within the toolkit that help you calculate both the internal and external costs among your options. And you can also perhaps see on the right side that we also highlight a really cool tool that NetHope has created that helps institutions even compare the cost of cash versus the cost of digital payments for programming and operations. But so you can see that we look at both internal and external, the cost of the new infrastructure, the new accounts, the payment process, what you're going to have to do internally to get yourself ready, and so on. So
let's think about an example here. We have colleagues here at UNCDF, and many of us know that there's going to be social cash transfers being in the Ebola response context. So will this help us determine the exact cost of making digital payments in that context?
Well, no, Ruth, unfortunately not. it would be great if it could. That would be a big win for everybody. But actually what this toolkit really offers is a ballpark for the options you've defined. Actual
okay, Jamie, hold on.
Yeah.
Ballpark is an American term. How would you translate that into a language for everybody else?
I would say a reasonable estimate.
Okay. So,
yeah,
it's an estimate amount, not an exact one, right, that we're going to.
It can't give you the actual cost. That really can only be done once you're really digging into where you're working, inviting bids from your payment service provider partners, and so on. But this will give you a really reasonable estimate that will help you keep working through the decision-making process.
Okay, so obviously this is a toolkit that has to apply whether you're in Sierra Leone or Ukraine, as I see one of the questions coming in there, or in Bihar, or wherever you are. It has to apply, and so it gives people direction to ask the right questions and gives you an estimate that will be helpful. But obviously, it will have to be tailored exactly to your context.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that obviously there is a simulation, you said, for this cost.
Yes, that's what we take you through there in step number 4.
Great. And so once you've done all the costs, there are always risks, right? So that's the next one is to assess risks.
Yep. Step number 5 is to assess the risk. So once you know your option sets and have a ballpark for how much it may cost, it's then really important to know whether a particular option set may expose your institution to greater risks or your recipients to greater risks or vulnerabilities than any other. So step 5 helps you assess the risks that you may face for each of the different option sets. It includes some initial thoughts on mitigating factors for each of these potential vulnerabilities that you may face.
So I can see 9 on the screen here, but what do most development partners worry about in your experience, Jamie?
Well, I mean, Ruth, you name it. There's a little bit of everything, and this really depends on where you are and what you're trying to achieve. But you know, what I see people worrying about lots of things. You know, that this is going to be harder to implement than they planned, that it's going to be harder for recipients to use than they thought it would be, or will expose them to other risks that they hadn't thought through before. Maybe that their payment service provider partner won't be willing to provide the solution at a reasonable cost, or won't be as solid of a partner as they really need to provide a service to a really vulnerable population, or you know, that they're what they want doesn't match the reality on the ground. You know, these are all things that could come up. So the risks that folks face, I mean, this really can vary, but really thinking carefully about whether there are risks that could influence the feasibility of your different option sets, that's a really important thing to do at this stage. Really think about, you know, for what you think you could deploy, what are some things that could come up that could be a vulnerability for you, your institution, for the recipients that you're trying to reach.
Yes, I noticed that on number 5 it says the solution leads to lock-in to one provider, and I know that one of our members has said to me, well, you know, it was a great solution, we achieved all our other goals, but now we're locked in and we don't want to stay with that one provider. What are we going to do? So to really understand that risk, I mean, each of those have solid examples behind them, don't they? So to really understand that, are we prepared to make those trade-offs is really an important part of the process. And I said there were 6 steps. And this is number 5, and the 6th one is because then you have to come up with a recommendation, right? That's your 6th step.
Yeah, you got to pull it all together at the end here, and so that is the 6th step. So what is the recommendation? What option are we going to go with here? So the final step is to do the final evaluation of the feasible option sets that you found from step 3 against the objectives from step 1. And in light of the costs that you've analyzed in step 4, the risks that you've analyzed in step 5. And so once you've done all that and you've considered and maybe even consulted some of those various stakeholders that we said were so important to identify in step 2, when you are able to put all that together, this should lead you to a clear recommendation of a preferred option. And this will ensure that a well-thought-out recommendation is not only more likely to be approved internally in your institution, but will also prove easier to implement when you move to that stage. And so what you see here is, you know, a blank screen, unlike the one that was very dense with all of the option sets before. But I did want to point out that we do simulate this for that entire process for INGO in that country of ecosystemia. So once you receive and you start to dig into that beta toolkit, the version of the toolkit that we'll be sending around, you can actually see which of these 3 options that INGO actually chose and why they chose it and how they got to that point. But I just wanted to show you that this is where you're going to end up at the end when you get to your recommendation limit.
And so people can work through that example, that simulation first, and then apply it to their apply the same questions to their own program as they use the toolkit. So that those boxes will be filled very quickly, I'm sure. So those are all the 6 steps that the toolkit takes everybody through, and this is based on the experience of our members and a wide set of friends and others from the Alliance. And so again, I really thank everyone who's been part of this. But there are lots of questions. I mean, we've ended up with step 6 on recommendations, and there are lots of questions that people have once they've gone through this process. So in the toolkit, there is a section on frequently asked questions, right?
Yes, absolutely. So this is kind of a core part of the general resources section, that final section 4 of the toolkit. That we, based on the experience that we've had, the process that we went through to create this toolkit, we have pulled together right now what is 13 frequently asked questions. So this slide that you see here is just the first 5, which includes not only the question but an initial answer to the question, but also where you can learn more about that question or delve into that issue a little bit more within the toolkit. So we continue to refine these and will continue to refine them as users and testers like you guys on the webinar, you folks here, I hope, provide your input and your feedback. But this just shows you the first 5.
Well, instead of going through all of these on the screen, we have time, and so I'd love to do a poll of what are the most burning questions that everyone has today. So you can see in front of you the questions about what that says. The question is, which of the following best reflects your most burning question about shifting from cash to digital payments? So is it about the risks, understanding what they are, thinking about them, short-term and long-term? Is your most burning question about understanding the costs and benefits? Or is it what has to be in place before we start, since many of you are starting off? Or we've got a more technical question about the difference between digital payments and digital delivery and comparing that to cash. So which of those, if you could click on your screen, which of these are your most burning questions that we would need to include in the more in the frequently asked questions? And also, Jamie, we're going to come back to you in real time now before the end of the webinar on the top ones. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll close the poll and see. Oh, it's a nice mix. So a quarter of the people are concerned about the costs and benefits, understanding that. Almost 40%, I would guess that would be the people who are starting out and want to know what needs to be in place before starting. We don't want to end up with start off and then go, oh dear, we should have thought of that later. So, and then of course the risks, there's always going to be concern about risks. So Jamie, do you want to take questions 2 and 3 as those are the top ones that came up? And also that has been the questions that have been scrolling in. This issue of what needs to be in place before starting has come up as well. So you want to take a crack at questions 2 and 3?
Yeah, absolutely. So the possible costs and benefits, we've been kind of going through that in the toolkit as we've explained it, and we really try to, in that section 1 on context and awareness, really explain this a little bit more thoroughly. Part of that is really evaluating digital payments versus some of these more tech-enabled models like electronic vouchers, which are great for helping programs track payments and reduce some costs, but they don't link to the payment system or to financially inclusive accounts. And so, if 50% of you really want financial inclusion, you're not going to get it through an e-voucher or a cash transfer. I actually saw a really great question. How does a digital payment enable financial inclusion more than cash transfer? So financial inclusion, when you're paying through an actual payment account, you have the added benefit of this secure place where that money is stored, and that recipient can choose when they want to pick up that cash transfer. They don't have to necessarily, depending on the design, of course, but they don't necessarily have to go on a payment day where everyone knows that this is the day that you're going to get the money and have it in your pocket. They can choose where to pick, not just when, but where to pick it up. They could choose to save some of that money if they wanted to and not have to have the risk of carrying it around, having it under the mattress, the social risks of, the neighbors and the cousins and so on asking for the money knowing that you've just been paid. So those are some of the benefits for the recipient and for some of the goals that you have in terms of financial inclusion, since I know that was so important, but also lots of other efficiencies that the institution gets to take advantage of as well, in terms of having that very transparent, streamlined way of paying. But of course, there are lots of costs. If you're going to pay via agents, you need to make sure that the agents are well trained, that they're going to have the money to pay the beneficiaries when they're ready, that they know and are respectful to those to the beneficiaries and to the recipients that you're paying. There needs to be enough of them. You need to have the systems in place and have a good relationship with your payment service provider and know that you can trust that those payments will be made reliably, because really that's the end goal, is that you're trying to get the money to the people that need them. So the toolkit really takes you through both of these different, here's what you could get out of this, and here are the benefits that you can, but here are the real costs, and we don't gloss over the costs. There was also a really great question, I think maybe from the same person, of, maybe we need to highlight that it's not always going to be digital payments that wins out in the end. It's not always going to be, that's not always going to be the most, the recommendation that we get to. And that is absolutely true. And maybe you should have mentioned it, but at the end of that section 2, readiness and engagement, when we say whether you're ready to shift and where to start, that whether is really important. If you're not ready to shift, we're going to tell you. The toolkit is going to tell you. And it may be that there needs to happen internally for you or for the payment infrastructure where you're working. I think that the question talked about war crisis situations. It's not always going to be the best option, but we really take you through that process of understanding whether it is and explaining why it could be and also the cost that you're going to have. I feel like I went through 3 or 4 different questions there instead of just one. And then the other one, how do you know when you're ready? That's really the readiness and engagement section. Yep.
Pause 1 minute, because you were asked. I could see that as the questions were coming in, you were asking them as you went. But there's a related question to that about women. We have many of the beneficiaries or recipients or clients are women, and so when you were talking about needing, being able to choose where, when, whether to save, this is a really important question for women. So could you just clarify whether this toolkit takes into account gender issues?
Right. So, the toolkit has a lot going on. It's not a department store. It doesn't have like a women's section in it necessarily. But what we do have in the framing the case section, when we talk about identifying your stakeholders, that's actually a multi-step process. And that's not just talking about your champions and who internally is going to be, making sure that your institution's ready to do this, but there's a whole section on really understanding your recipients. And we take into account here, that women, by and large, so far have been the core population that is receiving cash transfers, whether it's these from development partners or from governments. women tend to be the recipients. So we walk you through really what you need to understand about your recipients, their needs, their demands, and how to really evaluate them as a stakeholder in this process. So that is where you would really, there's some nods to the gender elements there. We don't focus on it as a whole course section, but certainly that's where you'd want to spend some time really thinking through your recipients as a stakeholder and how to evaluate their needs when you're going through this process.
Thank you. It's really important to make sure that whoever is going through that understands those gender issues about their recipients and clients. And there's also one other point that came up where you were talking about, and I see one of the questions that asked about what's available in the country where you're working in terms of the infrastructure, and that there may be an opportunity for working with other members of the alliance within that country, if the country's, particularly if the country's a member, to look at how to develop the digital payments ecosystem so that it can be ready for development partners who want to use digital payments, so that there's an advocacy opportunity there for working with other members of the alliance. And so when we get to this community of practice and looking at the toolkits, there may be an opportunity to think about how to develop that part of development partners' role of working with other members of the alliance, governments and companies, and who are part of creating an ecosystem that works for everybody, not just those who are already financially included. So it's now coming. All of our Better Than Cash Alliance webinars start exactly on time and finish on time. So the other questions that we've not got to will all go immediately into this community of practice. So you can see on the next screen coming up that following this webinar, you'll receive a link. Each one of you will receive a link to join a Toolkit community forum on Yammer, which is a social network site, but only those people who are invited can be there. And this will let you download the beta version of the toolkit, interact with Jamie and our colleagues who work on knowledge and research at the Better Than Cash Alliance. And over the next month, we would ask you to we'll include all these questions that you've got there, provide feedback, share your stories, as Jamie said, that if there are other case studies that would be useful, and then we will refine it and finalize the toolkit for a formal launch on our new website in April, which we're super excited about, because then you'll be able to actually click through all the links and then go to the resources that are there to find additional help for you as you go through this process. So I would like to conclude by saying thank you so much to Jamie for your work on this toolkit, as well as all the other partners who've been involved in that. Thank you to everyone for joining us. You can see here that you can join us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and to follow what the Better Than Cash Alliance is doing. That we would also like to say, if you have friends who work for governments, or if you're interested in what governments are doing and advocacy opportunities there, tomorrow morning, same time, same place, we are looking at the government toolkit. And so we really invite you to register for that one if you're interested, and then that too will have a community of practice that will work on the toolkit and how to improve that. So without further ado, thank you very much. I wish you all a good evening in the Pacific and Asia, and a good rest of the day wherever you are, and look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Thank you so much.